The report is factual mostly, but in my opinion, there are certain areas which lends itself to a degree of ambiguity. Something that would have been explaining with the time frame as to what happened exactly at what stage, including the failure of both the engines. Neither of the two pilots would have had their hands on the fuel control switch. Both their hands would have been elsewhere. See, it's the duty and responsibility of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau to come out with the preliminary report, which they have within the 30-day stipulated period. The report is factual mostly, but in my opinion, there are certain areas which lends itself to a degree of ambiguity. Specifically, I would have liked to have seen something that would have been explaining with the time frame as to what happened exactly at what stage, including the failure of both the engines, including when this apparent conversation happened between the pilots and when the Mayday call happened. That would have made the report a little bit more factual. It would have made it a little bit more clearer, and it would have lent itself lesser to this degree of ambiguity which we are seeing at this point in time.
What, in your expertise, could be the cause of engine fuel cutoff switches to move from run to cutoff within just 1 second? Could it be manual defect, electrical defect, or software malfunction?
I would like to take a little bit of time on this, since I've flown the aircraft for 10 years and I've got a lot of experience, about 4,500 hours on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The mechanics of the takeoff, if you look at it from a layman's point of view, there is one person who is flying and another person who is monitoring. As per this preliminary report which has come out, it was the first officer who was seated on the right seat who was flying, and the pilot in command who was sitting on the left seat who was monitoring. So during a normal takeoff, the moment the first officer, in this case who was a pilot flying, would have pressed the toga switches to start the takeoff roll, he would take his hands off and put his hands on the control column. And thereafterwards, both his hands would be on the control column, and the pilot monitoring, in this case, would normally have his right hand on the thrust levers. The takeoff appeared to be normal, and somewhere around, I would say about 40, 50 odd feet, there seemed to be a little bit of a yaw based upon the video evidence that I have seen, which is probably indicative of the time at which the first engine had failed. Neither of the two pilots would have had their hands on the fuel control switch. Both their hands would have been elsewhere. The first officer, if he was a pilot flying, both his hands would have been on the control column on the right, and the pilot monitoring, in this case the pilot in command, would have been on the left with his right hand on the thrust lever, which is distinct from where the fuel control switches are, and monitoring the takeoff. I do not think anybody would have had his hands anywhere remotely close to the fuel control switches. And in any case, even if a single engine had failed, our normal standard operating procedure would indicate that you climb to a safe height of minimum of 400 feet, stabilize the aircraft, autopilot on, and only then you carry out memory items, which might involve securing a failed engine.
You've just explained in detail about the how the system works. But when we talk about human errors, in the report itself, there was a clear communication between the pilots about on denying switching off the fuel cutoff switches. So is it safe to rule out pilot error during the accident? Because there has been a statement of our minister that has come, a civil aviation minister, and he has said that don't jump to conclusion based on pilot's conversation. How do you see the statement?
My interpretation of the conversation would be something as follows. This is my interpretation and logic. Let's imagine that I was the pilot flying, and I suddenly find a loss of thrust of both engines. Or rather, I was a pilot monitoring and see that there is a loss of thrust in both engines. And I will ask, did you cut off to the other person? What does that imply? That I have not done anything myself. I'm asking the other person, right? And he replies, I have not. So what does this mean to you? Logically, it would see that neither of the two had anything to do with the fuel cutoff switches. So I would imagine that this event has happened without any pilot intervention on the fuel control switches. That's my interpretation.
On the report, the Airline Pilot Association has also made a statement. They questioned the report. They said the tone and the direction of investigation suggest a bias towards pilot error. We categorically reject this presumption and insist on a fair, fact-based inquiry.
See, that is the ALPA's responsibility, and naturally they will stand up for the pilots. And I am also a pilot. I also firmly believe that it would take a very deliberate act in the process of takeoff, while you're involved in something else, to even think of putting any control switches off, which I don't think has happened in this case. An event has happened. What is that event? That event has happened that both the engines have failed within a second of each other. And now, if you look at it from a pilot's viewpoint, if I have to switch off the fuel control switch, I have to first look for it because my attention is elsewhere. I have to identify it. I have to pick it up. It's a spring-loaded switch. Pick it up, take it out from where it is engaged, and move it deliberately to the cutoff position, and then release it into its cutoff position. This takes time, right? And then I have to do it to two switches. I don't think there is any commercial pilot in the world who can put off both the switches in 1 second. So now, just to elaborate a little bit upon this fuel control switch. When the fuel control switch is put to cutoff, or rather when it is put to run, as it was during this entire period from the startup till that particular point in time in which this apparently there is a loss of thrust and a cutoff of the fuel supply. There are a few things that happen. Once the fuel switches are moved to the run position, which happens at the startup of the first engine, and then the startup of the second engine, which both the fuel switches are to run. Incidentally, the report also says that in the crashed site, both the fuel switches were found to be in the run position, right? So now, once contact is made, a sequence of actions happens. There are certain micro switches which are embedded inside where the fuel control switches are. They send signals to different places. One is to the FADEC, the other is the software control which controls the engines, and next is the fuel control switch which switches on or switches off the fuel supply from the aircraft tanks into the engine. So where in these three positions or four positions a failure has occurred, because in my opinion, I'm just a pilot in this, it is near impossible for it to have happened manually within 1 second of each other. You're taking your eyes off, you're not thinking about the takeoff, and then you are manually putting it. It can't happen in 1 second unless you're a fighter pilot, which I safe to presume that both of them were not. I do not think that anybody could have done that. Possibly the cause will have to be investigated further, for which the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board has the requisite support of all the experts available. The NTSB is there, Boeing is there, GE is there, whoever they want, whatever they want, all expertise is available to them. I'm sure they'll come out with the result.
Lastly, now that the preliminary report is out, and after narrowing down the investigation, what is, in your point of view, the investigators must be focusing at during the further course of investigation, as per the preliminary report?
Okay. First is that the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau is a set of professionals. They know exactly what is to be done. They know the direction in which it is to be done. All that I find in the preliminary report is that that report itself lends itself to a degree of ambiguity, which is the result, and as a result of which you've got so many questions being asked. I'm sure that they are proceeding in the correct direction. I'm sure that they have the expertise available, and where they do not have the expertise themselves, they will seek expertise